The Get Rich Slow Club podcast is a collaboration between Tash from Tash Invest and Ana from Perla. The Get Rich Slow Club acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we record on. From coast to coast, across land, waters, and communities, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Any advice is general and does not consider your financial situation, needs, or objectives, so consider whether it's appropriate for you.
Welcome to the Get Rich Slow Club podcast,
where we take you from beginner to confident investor,
where we can teach you everything you need to know about investing.
So come get rich slow with us. Jenny Rolfe-Wallace is a financial educator in which she works at Sprout Education to help people build financial knowledge, confidence, and empowerment. She also has an international award-winning podcast, It's Not About the Money Australia, where she explores why Australian women are more likely to experience lower levels of financial well-being, dispels myths, and advocates for systemic solutions to create a nation where gender doesn't determine financial outcomes. We are beyond excited to have Jenny on the show. And as we start each episode, we share our money moment, which is sometimes a win or loss. Jenny, what do you have for today?
I've got a very, very sad story because last Thursday I was driving home. I live in the country and I live on a very, very country road because we're on a little property. And coming home in the dark, in the rain, came around a corner, lined my car up, and there was I think already dead wombat right in the middle of my right lane. No. But because of where I was driving, there was no verge, so I couldn't go to the left. I didn't want to go to the right because it's on the other side of a hill. And I just lined it up and went over the top of the poor little thing, and it ripped the guts out of my car. So my loss is that I now have a car that needs to be fixed, but the money win is we have insurance, so that should hopefully take care of it. But, oh, gosh, just something that I didn't really want to happen at the end of the financial year.
Oh, that little moment of panic as well where you realise you can't really do anything about it. Like, it's so stressful.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
then the
and all of that training came back, the take the speed off, do not swerve, just line it up. Yes, so if it wasn't dead before I hit it, it definitely was afterwards. Poor thing.
So brutal.
Totally. The inconvenience of it as well. Like, insurance is great, but having to organise it, especially if you live rurally as well, like that would be quite challenging.
Yeah, and it's where, you can't really go without having a car where we are, so we'll definitely have to address that.
Oh, no. Hopefully it gets sorted quickly for you and that poor little wombat.
That's the worst bit. I just feel so bad.
Yeah, I've never seen a wombat in the wild. Like, I've seen them, but not in the wild. Only roadkill ones. So when I hear about another little wombat roadkill, I'm just like, oh, I've seen so many of you, but never... Yeah, I need to go to Wilson's prom or something to go and check them out.
They're much cuter alive.
Yes, I bet. Yes. We don't like seeing guts blown out.
Anna, what's yours? Do you have a money win for us? Or is yours a money loss as well?
Yeah, no, I guess, it's a win. So what we do in my household is we tally up all the things that we need to purchase like throughout the year, like these bigger purchases, right? Like sometimes appliances and this and that. And then what we do is we find those sales at like end of financial year, or, if there's Black Friday or whatever, like we hold on to them. So instead of that impulsive kind of side, we delay gratify ourselves by buying them. So there's been a lot of sales that we've been looking at because it's end of financial year, and Amazon Prime had a couple of them. So that's that. That's my word of wisdom. Thinking about when you're purchasing things, do you need it? Can you hold off? Can you make sure that it's on sale? Because that's the big one.
What have you bought so far?
Some stuff for my kids. The other one that I'm looking at, and I haven't pulled the plug on it yet, is a hand blender, like a stick blender.
Oh, okay.
Speaking of kettles, I would like a different kettle. Like, my kettle's been acting up, but I haven't done that yet. So I'm like looking at everything. I'm like, yes, sale prices. But in the past, we've gotten our coffee machine, our almost all of our appliances, like a crock pot, either during Black Friday or the end of financial year. The other thing I'm looking at is a pull-out couch for our other room, like when we have guests over.
Oh, a koala sofa bed coming maybe.
Yeah, I was looking at Koala. There's also this other brand, Eva, that has really nice ones. So yes, it's all like I have a few days left, so I got to get it done.
Exciting.
Yeah. Tash, what about you?
I went on a cruise over the weekend. I booked it last year in October. Carnival had this deal where if you signed up to their gambling program, like the ethics in this is very interesting. But anyway, if you signed up to their gambling program, you could get a cruise for $260 per person for 4 nights, which is amazing. But we also got $300 of onboard credit and a $100 like casino credit.
Wow.
But the big money win was when I went to the casino to claim the credit, they just gave me $100 in cash. So I just walked out with my $100, didn't even have to spend it, which is amazing. Yeah, so the cruise ended up being, I think it was like $410 in total, which is insane. So $210 each for 4 nights, like all your food is included, your activities, stuff like that. So it was fun. But the ethical side of that is quite interesting, where they give gamblers such cheap cruises.
Yeah, I was going to say it's so hard when you're looking at those things, the ethical side of it, because it's like it's a win for you, but it might be like a huge loss for so many other people who might not have a handle on gambling.
And as soon as they like leave Australian waters, the rules are a lot looser in the international waters.
Really?
And a lot of them have to pay their bill at the end. So you don't even need to just put the money up front to get the casino chips. You can just like put it to your room or whatever and then get charged it afterwards. And I've been seeing articles recently of people experiencing lots of financial stress and lots of sad things happening from that.
Yeah. I had no
Jenny's
clue.
nodding. Do you have any thoughts?
Jenny has thoughts for sure.
There was a very recent article about a very sad outcome of somebody incurring significant debts as a result of a gambling cruise, and it did not end very well at all.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Very sad.
It was also terrifying watching their like pressure for people to buy drinks as well. Like in Australia, they can't really pressure you to get an extra shot, but they were kind of like shaming people who weren't getting double shots in their drinks. Like I didn't drink alcohol at all on this cruise, but every time I went up to the bar to get like a Diet Coke or something, I'd see them be like, oh, an extra shot's only $6. And they'd roll their eyes if someone said no, or be like, oh, the line's really long, you should get a double shot. And seeing that was a bit shocking too, because I don't really ever see that in Australia.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. Like being Canadian, we have really strict alcohol laws as well. Like a shot is exactly a shot. And coming to Australia, that was very similar. And then you go down to the States and they just free pour. Like I remember once a friend getting a double and the drink of a Coke and rum was mainly clear. Like there was no Coke in it. So it is very interesting seeing it in different places. Great. Well, let's jump into it. Jenny, so you've been working in the financial industry for ages, also as a financial advisor and now an educator. How has your role evolved to where you are now?
Yeah, I've had a really interesting journey because I initially started my career as an educator in a university and then in a high school. And after doing that for several years, I was teaching economics, legal studies, business studies, commerce, so all of the financy, economicsy, businessy type subjects, and loved it. But after a while, I thought I really need to get some industry experience. And I'd been studying law and I'd also been studying financial advice. And when a role came up to move into the advice space, I grabbed it. And I did that for several years. But what I discovered is that actually I really loved working with my clients more to understand what they were doing rather than lying awake at night trying to work out which was the best investment product or superannuation fund. And so I naturally gravitated back into that education role. And I entered advice around the time of the Financial Services Reform Act, so a very, very long time ago. And as part of that, all advisors and people working in the space needed to improve their education qualifications. And I found myself actually teaching other financial advisors what was then known as the PS 146, now RG 146 course, which of course, it's all been upgraded since, but the Diploma of Financial Planning basically, and the Advanced Diploma. And I ended up going back into academia and worked for several years, University of Canberra, Griffith University, until I decided to move out and work more with consumers. So that's been my journey for the last 25 odd years, combining the advice space and then focusing on the education side of things. And I really, really love working with consumers because there's something about when you're working with people and you get the light bulb moment when somebody understands something, it's a real joy. And especially then seeing people take that information and take that understanding, building the confidence, and then going and making changes themselves. And I get a lot more joy out of that than I ever did in recommending specific investment products, I can tell you.
That's amazing. What do you do now? So you're a financial educator now?
Yeah, so that is my entire focus. So I work with institutions and organisations. So I still am providing training at a corporate, academic and professional level, and with a big focus particularly on the legal side and ethics and the other things, superannuation. And then working in, I love super, and working in the consumer space as well. So my favourite workshop to run with consumers, everyday people, is my superannuation boot camp, because when people arrive, and it's mainly women that I'm working with, I usually ask the question, who loves super? And maybe I'll get one or two hands, but by the end of it, when we've really demystified the language and explained what super is and what a powerful tool it can be, and we're not talking about providing advice at all, it's about understanding what it is and how to make the most of it. It's almost like all the things you need to know before you go and get professional advice. And to see people leave the workshop, or more to the point, not want to leave because they've had so much fun that they just hang around and talk, and then go and make changes themselves or go and seek that professional advice. I love that, because super, when you demystify it, when you take away the complexity, is, I think, a really exciting thing. And I love being able to take that complexity and make it understandable.
I love how excited you seem about this. Like, I can see the passion on your face.
I genuinely love the work that I do, and I'm very privileged to be in the position I am in to do it, because there are so many questions, and I think especially women for a long time have been disengaged from the advice process because it has been dominated by men. And I think sometimes when we have questions and we want to find out information, we can feel really awkward asking those questions. And one of the things I do is create a really safe space. There's no such thing as a silly question, except the one that you leave having never asked. And in creating that really, really supportive and encouraging space, I think it creates an environment where we can really connect and we can grow and really support each other. And I do love that.
I love that so much. The only silly question is the one that you haven't actually asked.
Yeah,
That's such a good reminder. Why do you think it's mostly women who come to your workshops? Do you market them as workshops for women, or are women more attracted to them for some reason?
Look, I think there is a range of factors that come into play, but I think, if I look at the people that come to my workshops, they look a lot like me, and that is probably just that natural fit. I think also creating unique space where, as I said, it is a safe space where people are encouraged to ask questions. I think people find that a really attractive thing to be able to come to and to be able to engage with. And I think that for a long time, there have always been a lot of books that have been marketed at men. So if I think of the very first finance book I read in my very early 20s was Paul Clitheroe's Making Money book. And the other one that was around was Noel Whittaker's Money Made Simple. All right. So we've always had a lot of men working in the space. We had, Money was a TV show for a long time. If you look at the advice space and the financial services space, it is dominated by men. And I'm sure that there are lots of conversations that go on between men just as a part of everyday life. But it's not something that women are socialized to talk about in the same way. And I think it's not something inherently in our nature, but it is a lot about the environment that we're in and how we're brought up and how we interact with other people. So I think creating a space where women are given a platform to have the conversations that perhaps they've wanted to have and haven't been able to, that's why I think the work that I do particularly appeals to women. And I unashamedly do market to women because it is an underserved market. And I think bringing my lived experience and creating a platform for a range of lived experiences is a little bit unique. And I think there's a lot of women that are now doing it. And I think that is absolutely fantastic because we're creating spaces for women to come together and have the conversations that we have historically not been encouraged to have.
I think it's interesting when you talked about books that you read by men. I think I read a stat of female authors, especially when it comes to self-help books and money and finance being under them, that not only are they like underrepresented, but their sales are much lower than men, even if more female authors are growing within that space. So something that Tash and I will think about as our book comes out as well.
This is like not based on stats or anything, but just when I've noticed you walk into the finance section of books, you see all of these like their male faces and the men on the covers looking at you. But then the female books tend to not have female faces on the front. And I've always thought, like, does that deter some people from buying them? Which is very interesting when we've kind of like our faces on our book, but you walk in and there's so many men looking at you. Yes. Yeah.
So I wonder if someone picks up the book and sees that photo. And they're like,
Natasha and Anna,
female,
that's a bit feminine.
Two women experts. Yeah, I don't know if I can take their advice. They probably just know how to save and coupon, cut.
I think it's also really interesting when you see lists that come out, the top 10 finance lists, books, the top 10 finance podcasts. Who are putting those lists together? Because when I look at those lists, and one came around not that long ago, and I looked at it and went, they were all men, and they were all white men. And they were all, I'm going to argue, capitalist white men. And so if you've got, for example, men choosing those lists, and that's what goes out, then we create a perception that the experts in the space look a particular way, have a particular lived experience. And that is so flawed. But it's what we're socialised and what we're marketed, and it reflects the unconscious biases that we're all exposed to.
I'm really excited because now when I first started my Instagram, it was mostly females following, but as I've grown, it's becoming a little bit more equal. Like it's 60% females, 40% males now, which I think is pretty exciting that it's not just kind of the same echo chamber of people following me. Like it can be quite challenging having different views sometimes, but I'm glad it is kind of growing to be a bit of both now.
Well, the thing is that women shouldn't just be women in the finance space have, like men in the finance space have never even contemplated that they're only speaking to men. They're talking to everybody. And it is interesting that women are often positioned as being a voice for women. The reality is we can learn from everybody, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everybody has something to contribute. And I would like to think as younger generations come in, I would like to think there's a little bit more open-mindedness about where we get our information and learn from. It's not just finance books. We're talking about choosing school books. Why don't boys, or, reading books in school, boys aren't necessarily encouraged to read books by women authors or that have female lead characters. Yeah. We expect girls to read those books all the time. But if you have a book that has a girl as a protagonist, do we give those books to boys to read? Because they should be reading stories about female characters as much as they read stories about male characters.
Oh, I love this conversation because it's so interesting when it's viewed as like silly, fun, like fiction for females versus like serious novels for males. It's very interesting how it's like, oh, that's just a silly like book talk book versus this is a really good book that everyone should read. It's interesting seeing it blow up on TikTok in that way as well.
Look, I'm a big book fan and giving reading material to my kids from when they were little, and I've got a little mix, and they all have access to the same books and they're all encouraged to read all the books by all the authors and all the topics. I don't give the ballet books to the girls or the rugby book to the boy. It's just about encouraging a love of reading, and I love how my kids have really embraced that.
That's amazing.
But it's very intentional.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it has to be. I think finding diversity, whether it's how you consume information, whether it's podcast or book, you need to like self-seek that. And if you have kids, you need to seek that as well, right? Because I can see how much gendered things come into play, not from my household, but from external places for kids, right? So I can only assume that they're picking up these different things as we are getting these subtle messages about, this is women's finance or men's finance, whether we want to admit it or not. That's just how society works. I know, Jenny, you talk quite a bit about this, Australia being one of the wealthiest nations on earth, but gender can determine so much much of your financial experience. Can you talk, what are some of those biggest challenges and how are we able to kind of rectify that?
It is so entrenched in our systems that we're often just not even conscious. And while we're talking about kids, it actually even starts with our kids and the messages we give them about money. And I don't know whether you've talked previously with anybody about the gender pocket money gap, but when it comes to giving our kids pocket money, and if we tie that pocket money to jobs, there is very clearly from a very early age, and this is established in lots of different research, that we tend to pay boys more pocket money than we do girls. And one of the reasons,
That's so wild. What?
Yeah, I've read this too. I knew you would bring it up, Jenny. Yeah.
And we need to actually start with this conversation because everything flows from this, right? The way we're socialized as kids and the way we learn about money as kids. So one of the things is the kind of jobs that we give kids. So we give outside jobs like, washing the car, mowing the lawns. We tend to give those jobs to boys. And guess what? We tend to value those jobs more because, they might be dirty. You might get a sweat up. So we give those jobs to boys and we pay them more for it. And we're more likely to give inside jobs like cleaning up to the girls, and we value those jobs less. So we pay them less. So from a very, very young age, we are telling our kids there are different jobs based on your gender, and we're going to value the work that you do differently. And that messaging starts very young, and it also flows through to the messages that we tell our kids about the kind of work that they can potentially do and the kind of things that they should think about studying, and even the way that we value subjects. And that's a whole other conversation. But then as we look at how that gender pay gap follows us through life, we know that the gender pay gap starts from the moment somebody starts work. And you'll have people that say, but there are rewards and there are minimum wages. And yes, they are. But we know that if a man and a woman study the same thing at university, in the very first year of graduating, there is a gender pay gap. So male graduates on average are paid more than their female counterparts. Same university, same qualification. And so this is why when we start talking about we need to get, more women into STEM and into those higher paying careers like medicine and law, well, actually, it still doesn't address the fact that from the moment they leave university, we pay men and women differently. And there's lots of reasons for that. It's very systemic. So we've got this gender pay gap that then follows men and women throughout their lives. And then, of course, we add into that the disproportionate caring load that falls on women. So if kids, if people end up having children or having responsibility even for aging parents, that disproportionately falls on women. So what happens is women tend to then start working part-time or casually at a higher rate than men. And that usually happens during their peak earnings, which is in their 30s. So, women hit their peak earnings in their 30s, men it's in their 40s and 50s. And that's the time usually that women start taking breaks. And it's presented as though women are making the choice to stay home, that women are choosing to work part-time. They're choosing to work casually. They're choosing to work in occupations that pay them less, like nursing, aged care and childcare. The reality is these things are so deeply systemic, as I know you know, especially Anna, because you wrote about it in your book. Yeah. We don't make conscious choices. In fact, they're often just things that we do because that's how it turns out. But what that means is that by the time women hit their 50s, and they're often then going through relationship transitions, and they're finding themselves, single, often without a home, often with very, very little financial resources. And then we wonder why the growing demographic of homelessness is women in their 50s. It is the culmination of all of this life pattern. And we know that's why 1 in 3 women don't have superannuation. Of those that do, they're tending to retire on around half of what their male counterparts have. And it's partly because of the gender pay gap, working in lower paid industries, working part-time casually. But also we know that that's actually not going to change for young women. And that's what concerns me the most is I think we think this is just going to fix itself, that, this will change into the future. There was some modelling done that shows actually the average 20-year-old woman is going to be in a very similar situation as the average 50-year-old now, because we're not changing those systemic issues, and we're not addressing those systemic issues. But what do? We tell women, well, you need to save more, you need to get better paid jobs, you need to do this. We put so much of the emphasis back on the individual with no willingness to address, actually, there are systemic issues that if we genuinely want gender equality and we want everybody to have an opportunity for financial security, then we need to be addressing that at a systemic level. And to add into that, if we want to talk about sole parents, 84% of households in Australia, sole parent households, are headed by women. They are more likely to live in poverty than almost any other group. And so if we were serious about addressing poverty and intergenerational poverty and the impact that has on kids into the future, their health, their well-being, and their capacity to achieve financial security, we should be looking after the most vulnerable in our community far more than what we actually do. That was a very long rant.
Oh my gosh, I have so much to say. This is great.
Sorry, I should have drawn breath, right?
No, you're fine. I wrote a list of things to come back to. One of my first examples of when you were saying like males are paid more than females and it starts from the very beginning. I worked as a support worker for ages, which is a very female-dominated industry. But something I noticed really early on was that most of the team leaders and most of the area managers were all males, even though it was mostly females working in the role. And I found that really interesting, being like, there's females everywhere and you're still having a male head like an all-female house.
So there is a term for
men
that.
Principals and men who are head of childcare centers. Like it, yeah.
It is called the glass elevator, and it is a thing. So I did a master's of education, and my thesis was on the underrepresentation of women in educational leadership. So this just links in 80% of the and I did that in 2000. I graduated in 2000. The statistics have not changed, and this is why we need systemic solutions. So 80% of the education workforce is female. 20% of the leadership is female. So you're actually, I can't remember, that 5 times more likely as a male in a female-dominated industry to end up in leadership than a woman. And there's all of these excuses given, like women don't want those leadership roles, or that, the classic, well, if you're working part-time, you can't have a leadership position. Oh my gosh, we need job share roles in leadership, and we need more of that because there's no reason we can't. A lot of those things are used as to explain why women don't want it. Actually, there is so much more to it, and it also has to do with the biases of how we recruit people. Because if you've got a male-dominated leadership, they look for other leaders like them, and guess what? They tend to be male. It is mind-blowing that the most competent leaders we have in our nation across every level, where we're talking about government or organisations in corporate, that based on merit, men are somehow more meritorious than women. It is just a myth that we're told, and we need to question it more.
How do you question it more without having everyone just get really upset and disagree with you? Because even like on Instagram, I will share a statistic, like not my thoughts or opinions, just to start about the gender pay gap, and people will get really angry at me and tell me it doesn't exist, and they just won't want to see it. So what's the best way to approach that conversation with people?
Oh gosh, that is the $1 million question. I think part of that is because if we talk about merit, right, we want to believe that we got to the position we're in because we deserve it. And there's no question that there are some great leaders, who are in positions of power, but there are actually a whole heap more that missed out purely because of their gender or because of their circumstances. So I think it actually requires people to challenge their own unconscious biases a little bit more. Like, we want to be the hero in our own story. It is a very natural thing as a human, right? We want to believe the best in ourselves. We want to paint ourselves in a positive light. And if we start getting challenged at some things that, for example, gender pay gap, the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions, that might mean we actually have to question a lot of the things that we've always believed about ourselves and about others and about fairness. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be in. So I think it actually starts with people being prepared to sit with the discomfort of some very confronting truths. Like, I love using facts and statistics and research because to me, it's purely logical. But as humans, we have an emotional response. I think we need to be encouraged to sit with the discomfort of our emotions more. And again, I think that starts when we're having conversations with kids. It starts with sometimes admitting we don't know it all and maybe we're wrong, creating a space where we can actually be wrong about things. Because until people have the motivation to change their perspectives, they're not going to. You can give them all of the research and statistics in the world, but until somebody is prepared to go, oh, maybe I'm actually wrong, maybe everything I've believed about this is wrong, you're never going to see any change or growth. We need to all be open-minded and have a lot more conversations that make us uncomfortable.
I think this goes so much back to reading and books, like you were saying before. Like, I grew up in quite a privileged family and everything was quite easy for me, and I thought I deserved everything that I worked really hard for. And then when I started reading and traveling by myself, it was quite eye-opening to realize the amount of privilege I actually had. And like, I still have worked really hard, but it was a big moment to go from, oh, I've worked really hard for this stuff, versus like, these are all the things that have happened along the way to get me where I am now. And that was like a big switch for me. But I think reading so many books definitely helped me with that, and like understanding where someone else actually comes from and what their experience is like. And it's something I would never be able to experience personally. So I think maybe everyone should read more.
And Tash, you said you worked really hard. Yes, you did work really hard for the things that you achieved, but you didn't have all of the, I think one of the things to understand about privilege and entitlement is that we can work really hard. We can, study really hard. We can work all hours. We can put the effort in, but we're doing that without all of the obstacles in front of us that other people
I had
so
somewhere to
they're
live,
also,
I had food, I had education paid for, I lived in Australia, like all of those things.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had parents who were supportive and wanted me to do well as well.
Yeah.
So many things.
And privilege is about not just the advantages you have, but the lack of disadvantages, the lack of challenges. And I think that's a really important thing to remember for people with a different lived experience to us, that they have often faced challenges we don't even know exist. And I remember talking to my daughter because, being white is a privilege. And we were talking about the privilege of being white and putting it in language she could understand as a teenager. Like, have you ever been followed in a store because somebody thinks you're going to steal something because you have a different skin colour? And she went, well, no. And I said, so ask your friends if that's ever happened to them. Guess what? It had. And that really opened her eyes to going, oh, that happens to some people. I didn't know that happens. Well, no, it doesn't happen because you have privilege of being white, my darling. And that is what it is. But you need to be aware of that, and you need to actively dismantle the challenges that you benefit from, dismantle the systems you benefit from that disadvantage others. That's what we need to do with privilege and entitlement.
Yeah, and it's a whole other conversation with disability as well. Like, I studied occupational therapy before I did finance stuff. And sometimes it feels random, but then other times it definitely links in really well. My honours project, back to what you were saying a little bit earlier, was about the occupational imbalance that informal carers experience. So people caring for their parents or for their teenagers with disabilities, stuff like that. And it was mostly females. And we broke down all of the areas that they were kind of lacking in compared to people who weren't those informal carers. So things like leisure, self-care, productivity, and like the impact was massive. And then we compared that to the carers allowance they were actually receiving. And it's crazy that there's such a big gap in that way and it's not recognized enough.
You see
Absolutely.
that with parenthood and parenting kids as well, right? Like, it's, Jenny, you were talking a lot about this being a systemic issue, and some of the things that we can do as individuals, such as looking at our biases, talking to our kids, talking to others, seeking alternatives. Are there societal things that we can do now? Like, I mean, I guess that's the big thing. If we want to see the next generations or younger people making a change, what can we do today, like as a society? Or are we all doomed? Because that's often how I feel. I feel like, yeah.
I'm far more hopeful because I look at the younger generation and they just inspire me because they just seem to get it so much more than I do or my peers, and particularly in terms of seeing people for people and seeing inequity and seeing injustice and being prepared to speak about it. I think there is a confidence in the younger generations, and I am talking about kids still at school, where they are far more confident in challenging the status quo and not conforming just because somebody says so. And I think that's really exciting. But on the other hand, what really concerns me at the moment, we're seeing such a widening philosophical and political ideological divide between young men and young women. And, you know, we need to acknowledge the influence of people like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson in this, where we are seeing men, young men, Generation Z, youngest generation of voters, are increasingly becoming radicalised to the right and extraordinarily conservative, to the point their political views are more conservative than those of 50 and 60-year-old men. At the same time, we're seeing young women move far further to the left, becoming far, far more progressive than we have in previous generations. And that is a really positive thing. But this widening divide is quite concerning. And we're going to see that influence our politics, but also our society. And that's going to be a big challenge moving forward. So we need to be having conversations about this. Like, number one, we need to be talking not just about money. Money is a part of the whole bigger picture, but these are very deep systemic societal challenges that we are going to face. And that goes alongside with other challenges we're facing at the moment, like climate change, like, you know, the levels of pollution, the issues around food security, around energy security. These are big conversations that are happening at the moment that completely tie into money and investing and what the choices that we're making as investors, as consumers in our work as well. But I'm actually really, really hopeful that the next generation has solutions to problems that are just emerging. I think they are amazing, and I think we need to listen to them more. You know, the dinosaurs, we've kind of had our time. I think we need to be looking at the leadership of young people, because they are going to create the future that we're moving into. And I think they are far more savvy than we often give them credit for.
Yeah, I'm always impressed because, you know, Tash is younger than I am, and hearing,
I'm technically still Gen Z, so that's fun.
Yeah, so I'm always impressed with like what Tash is doing, and yeah, I'm always like, Tash, tell me more. I learn a lot from her, right? Like, This is the important thing. Being in different generations doesn't mean that, you know, someone who's older has all the information or has all the resources. Like, let's learn from each other, back to those different perspectives and different ideas.
Yeah, and I think
just have a richer life.
It's really exciting to talk to people with different views, different lived experiences, and different perspectives. That's how we learn. And that goes back to what I was saying about sitting with the discomfort of our emotions and our thoughts and being open-minded. You know, having that growth mindset, I think, is really important.
And realising your thoughts can be different to your parents, because that was the biggest one for me.
Yeah.
And our parents are fallible, right?
Yeah.
You know that moment where you kind of realise, oh, my parents don't totally have it together. My kids worked that out far younger than I think I ever did. But that's also part of my intentional parenting with them, of going, actually, I don't always have the answers.
I would love to be your kids. You sound like a great mum.
I'm pretty sure the eldest would happily swap with you sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, I think for me, it's realising that my children are growing up in a very, very uncertain world. Like, we are in a generation where we have the haves, the have-nots, and the will never haves. And the level of wealth inequality and financial insecurity that we are moving into, I think, is more pronounced than we've seen in previous generations. And that has massive social implications and political implications as well. And so when I'm having conversations with my kids, it is partly to prepare them for a world that we don't know what that's going to look like. And so they need to be problem solvers. They need to be critical thinkers. They need to very much think outside the box, and they need to be a part of the solution. Because otherwise, sorry, Anna, we are probably all doomed. But I'd like to think that there is hope, but they need to be equipped.
Yeah, there's something I hear a lot on social media when I talk about investing and investing for the long term. I quite often get quite a few replies saying, well, the world's going to not exist in 60 years, or I'm going to die in 10 years, or I might die tomorrow. And a lot of kind of that doomsday more thinking of like, well, what's the point? The world's messed up anyway. Do you have a good response to that to try and help people be a bit more hopeful?
Yes, I think we can use our money for good. I'm a big one around alternative economic models. So economics is my first love. And I'm really excited about some of the emerging theories around collaborative consumption and circular economies. And I think that goes back into rethinking how we be good consumers and good investors. So we can invest in ways that create the future. So we can invest in renewable energies. We can invest in research that is investigating alternatives to some of the problems that we're experiencing now. And I think as investors, we have an obligation to really align where we are putting our money as consumers and investors with our values. And that means stepping back and thinking about what's really important to you as a person. And for us as a family, it's very much around minimizing our impact on the earth and really rethinking and bringing a very conscious approach to the decisions we make around how we spend our money. And also then looking at the whole of life of a product, from when it's created to how is it going to be disposed of, really stepping back as a consumer, but then also thinking about when we're investing, how do we put our money into things that are going to create a better future? And I think that's a really powerful thing. Imagine if we all did that, and we all did that even through our superannuation funds, or we all did that through our savings, choosing banks that align with positive impact on the world rather than just the bank we've always used.
Can you list a few banks who are doing positive things?
I think if people use their search engine to just do some investigating, you can find out there are some organisations out there that are doing some really good things, but also the ones to avoid as well.
Let's end with a really fun question. Should we eat the rich? I know you have some views on this, Jenny.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, we should eat the rich?
Absolutely, we should eat the rich. Look, I think it's interesting because when we look at, the natural world and we look at how animals, in their little groups, their herds, there's a very sharing focus. Like communities of animals survive by supporting each other, right? And I think as humans, we thrive when our community around us thrives. I think it's a very skewed system that allows individuals to exploit the labour of others and hoard wealth. And hoarding wealth is what it is. $1 billion is significantly more than $1 million. And I am very much a fan of financial security and financial well-being for what it looks like for each individual. But I think when we have a very small proportion of people in the planet that own the bulk of productive resources, and those resources are exploited in a way that creates pollution and adds to climate change, and marketing things that we don't need, that we buy with money we don't have to impress people we don't even like, we need to really rethink that system. And I think the problem with, capitalism is absolutely the best model that we have at the moment, but it works the way it's designed, and it is not designed to create equity and fairness and for everybody to have their fair share. It is designed to allow entrepreneurs to accumulate wealth to a point beyond that which they will ever use in their lifetime. And it comes at the expense of the ordinary everyday person. And we are sold this lie that if we work hard, we too can be like those people. We can work every single minute of our life and we will never accumulate wealth in the way that those people, particularly those that have inherited their wealth, ever will. And I think that those people do have an obligation to contribute to a healthy planet, and that includes care for people, care for planet, and a fair share. And they are principles that I think we should be promoting rather than he who dies with the most toys wins. I think it's a very damaging way of viewing the earth and the resources of the earth. And I think it's really interesting, some of the work that has been done around the tragedy of the commons that has underlined the way that we build economic systems and promoted privatisation. Actually, it's a flawed thing, and research shows that when people have common interests, they actually are more likely to take care of things than one individual owning. And I think it's time for us, it's past time for us in the current climate for us to rethink some of our systems, because even the underlying idea of economics, which is unlimited wants with limited resources? How do we meet those unlimited wants? Why do we have to have unlimited wants? Why can't we talk about when enough is enough and sufficiency and about sharing the benefits in our community? And I think we need to have those conversations more, because the path we're on is simply not sustainable in the long run.
Jenny for president.
So many good answers.
Was that a very, very long... You ask me things I get really passionate about.
I know, you articulate it so well.
I just really think, and I think being trained as an economist, and all we ever learned in my economics was about capitalism. And I even remember as a student going, there's got to be more to this. There has to be more. And also even all the economists that we study, they were all men, from Adam Smith to John Maynard Keynes, who I have a little bit of a soft spot for. But, John Maynard Keynes really challenged the status quo, and his whole approach to economics was so ostracised for a very, very long time, until we got the Great Depression, because, that neoliberal, or back in that classical way of viewing economics was the way things were done. And, we've had this growth of neoliberalism, particularly in Australia, over the last 20-odd years. And it's damaging, because all it does is the people who have get more. And we saw that during COVID, right? The wealthy got wealthier while the rest of us were struggling with everyday life. Their wealth grew. And if that doesn't tell you that our current economic model is problematic, then I don't know what will. And we need to question more, and we need to challenge that more, and we need to come up with a better way of doing life, because otherwise future generations are going to be significantly disadvantaged, and we will end up with revolution. I think it's inevitable.
You have definitely inspired me. I feel a little bit jaded sometimes when I spend time on social media. This has been such a positive conversation. I feel like we could have you on again just to ask you all of my fun philosophical Instagram questions. So maybe another time. Do you have a quick book recommendation for us?
Well, there's this great book coming out called How Not to Work Forever.
Yes.
I've got a good podcast recommendation, though. There's one called It's Not About the Money, Australia, which is actually Jenny's podcast. So if you have loved this kind of lens of intersectionality, money, economics, go check out her podcast, because it's phenomenal. And it won an international award. So there you go.
Congratulations to both of you. That was very exciting to see.
It was indeed very exciting. And in addition to recommending Anna's book, Kids Ain't Cheap, which I genuinely love, and tell all the people that I know who are having kids to read it, one a little bit out of the box, Good Money by Natalie Spencer. She's an Australian. She specialises in behavioural economics and behavioural finance. And Good Money explores the behaviour around why we do what we do. And I find it's really easy to read, and I think it's a great one if people want to understand more around the psychology underlying their choices.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing and for joining us. Everyone should definitely go listen to your podcast. I know I'll be adding it to my next list, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
It
Jenny.
has been fun chatting.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you found this episode helpful, please rate us 5 stars, write a review, or share with a friend. If you're new to investing, make sure to listen to our first 10 episodes. Follow us at Get Rich Slow Club, or Tash at Tash Invest, or me at Ana Cristina.
This show was brought to you by Natasha Etchman, who is an authorised representative 1299881 of Guideway Financial Services, AFSL 420367, and Perla, who is an authorised representative 1281540 of Sanlam Private Wealth, AFSL 337927. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to investing. So make sure you check out our financial services guides and read the product disclosure statement and target market determination for any investments you're considering. See our show notes for more info.